Tonight, Ottawa pushes back, saying Canada will not accept a bad trade deal from the U.S.
We're not going to accept any deal because of an arbitrary timeline that the Americans set. We're going to do the work that's necessary to get the best deal for the country.
Somebody's going to have to move in this space, and we would suggest that it should be Canada.
Well, let's take a deep breath here and stay calm.
Industry, businesses, Canadians, they are anxious and they are concerned. They don't deserve the uncertainty that's been thrust upon them.
Trump's higher tariffs of 35% on some Canadian goods went into effect, and the two sides failed to reach a deal by the president's Friday deadline. It was not clear what might break the impasse.
Well, Jolene, the White House announcing President Trump signing an executive order increasing tariffs on Canadian goods from 25% to 35%.
Unlike Mexico, which won a 90-day reprieve from Trump's sweeping new taxes on imports, Canada was singled out for more pain. In making the announcement, Trump accused Canada of failing to cooperate in curbing the flow of fentanyl and other drugs across the U.S. border. Ottawa strongly rejected this characterization, emphasizing that the Canadian government has intensified efforts to combat drug smuggling and dismantle trafficking networks.
Less than 1% of the total crossing U.S. borders was from Canada, but of that less than 1%, that's gone down another 89% since last June.
But the administration's stance remained unchanged, pushing forward with a decision that has raised eyebrows not only abroad, but also within the United States itself. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney expressed measured disappointment. "We are disappointed by this decision," he said, noting that the increase was unnecessary and potentially damaging to both countries' economies. Canada, he added, has worked constructively with the US on trade, security, and law enforcement for decades. Economists and financial analysts on both sides of the border have warned that these tariffs will raise costs for businesses, drive up consumer prices, and weigh on the US economy. Their predictions have been dismissed by the Trump administration, which insists the tariffs will strengthen America's economic position. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt told reporters that Trump was proving the so-called economic experts wrong at every turn, claiming that his approach was rebuilding the greatest economy in the history of the world. But beneath the confident words, the implications for the US economy are serious. Tariffs at this level on a partner as significant as Canada are not cost-free. Canada is the United States' largest trading partner, with two-way trade exceeding $1.2 trillion annually. The relationship is deeply integrated, particularly in the automotive, energy, agricultural, and manufacturing sectors. Millions of jobs in both countries are tied to this economic bond. Despite the 35% headline tariff, nearly 90% of Canadian goods entering the US are exempt thanks to the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA. Key exports like fresh produce, energy products, and many industrial goods will continue to flow without additional taxes. However, specific sectors, including dairy products, lumber, and leather, could face increased costs, potentially impacting prices in US markets. For Canada, the tariffs are symbolic as much as economic, a reminder that its largest trade partner is willing to use tariffs as leverage even within the framework of a free trade deal. The decision to raise tariffs on Canada also came with a reprieve for Mexico. Goods from Mexico were spared from a similar increase, with current rates extended for another 90 days. Trump cited Mexico's more constructive approach in trade talks compared to Canada as the reason for the different treatment. This comparison has only added to the frustration in Ottawa, where officials see the tariff hike as politically motivated. Beyond Canada, Trump's executive order imposed sweeping tariffs on dozens of other countries, hitting imports with rates of between 10% and 50%. Even small economies like Vanuatu and Papua New Guinea faced 15% duties. Countries not named explicitly in the list will face baseline tariffs of 10%. While the breadth of these measures shows the administration's willingness to confront global trade partners, it also underscores the scale of disruption these policies could bring to supply chains, prices, and economic growth. For Canada, the decision was not entirely unexpected. Over the past several years, the tone of trade negotiations with Washington has shifted dramatically. While Canada and the US remain tightly connected economically, the reliability of the US as a trade partner has been called into question. Prime Minister Carney acknowledged this reality in his remarks following the tariff announcement. "We have a very integrated supply chain between Canada and the United States, built over decades," he said. "But Canada has already made a decision about reducing our reliance and overdependence on the United States. There are markets beyond the United States." This statement reflects a strategic shift that has been quietly taking place in Ottawa for years. In response to rising trade tensions, Canada has pursued stronger economic ties with the European Union through the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, expanded its partnership with Pacific Rim countries under the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP, and increased engagement with emerging markets in Asia and Africa. The rationale is clear. Diversification is a safeguard against instability. If U.S. policy under Trump continues to prioritize tariffs and unilateral trade measures, Canada's economy cannot afford to be overly dependent on a single market. By building alternative trade relationships, Ottawa is seeking to protect its industries and workers from unpredictable policy shifts in Washington. The economic fallout of the tariffs will not be immediate, but the signs are already visible. Analysts warn that the increased costs for Canadian goods subject to the tariffs will lead to higher prices in U.S. markets. In sectors like construction, where Canadian lumber plays a critical role, the price increases could be significant. Similarly, tariffs on Canadian dairy products could impact food prices for American consumers. For the U.S. economy, the risk is twofold: higher costs for consumers and businesses and potential retaliatory measures from Canada. While most Canadian exports are exempt under USMCA, Ottawa retains the ability to target politically sensitive American exports if necessary. Retaliatory tariffs could hit U.S. agricultural products, manufactured goods, or even energy exports. Such measures would inevitably lead to job losses in U.S. industries that depend on exports to Canada. Critics of Trump's approach point to history as a warning. Canada and the US have weathered trade disputes before, from lumber to dairy to steel and aluminum. But the strength of the relationship has always been rooted in cooperation and shared economic interests. Pushing this relationship into open conflict risks not only economic harm, but also political damage that could take years to repair. In the days following the tariff announcement, Canadian officials signaled a willingness to continue talks, but also a readiness to defend their interests. "Canada will always stand up for its workers and its industries," Carney said. Behind the scenes, Canadian negotiators are reportedly exploring targeted countermeasures and accelerating trade discussions with other global partners. For businesses on both sides of the border, the uncertainty is the most immediate concern. Cross-border supply chains, particularly in the automotive sector, are highly sensitive to tariff changes. Parts and components often cross the border multiple times before a finished product is assembled. Disruptions in this flow could raise costs, delay production, and impact jobs in both countries. The integrated nature of the U.S. Canada economy makes this dispute particularly risky. According to the Royal Bank of Canada, 75% of Canadian exports go to the U.S., while Canada is the top export destination for more than 30 U.S. states. In states like Michigan, New York, and Ohio, Canadian trade supports hundreds of thousands of jobs. A trade war may sound like a political strategy in Washington, but in practical terms, it is a gamble with livelihoods across North America. As the August 7th implementation date for the tariffs approaches, global markets are watching closely. Goods already loaded onto ships by that date and in transit to the US will not be affected if they arrive before October 5. This short window has sent exporters rushing to move goods before the higher rates take effect. Meanwhile, political leaders in Ottawa are using the moment to push for greater independence in trade policy. The message is clear: Canada will continue to trade with the US, but it will no longer rely on that relationship as its sole anchor. Diversifying export markets, strengthening alliances, and building resilience are now priorities. In the United States, the political debate over tariffs continues. Supporters of Trump's approach frame it as a necessary defense of American industries. Opponents argue it is a short-sighted policy that risks long-term economic harm. The outcome of this debate will likely depend on the real-world impact of these tariffs over the coming months, on prices, jobs, and growth. For now, one thing is certain: the tariff increase on Canada is more than just an economic measure. It is a political signal, a test of a decades-long partnership, and a moment that could reshape the trajectory of North American trade. Whether this will ultimately strengthen or weaken the US economy remains to be seen, but the risks are high and the consequences could be far-reaching.